Hi, my name is Alexander. In this video, we will use Portfolio with Visual Studio Dev Tunnels for audit purposes. Visual Studio Dev Tunnels is a feature that allows developers to securely share local web services across the internet, enabling ad hoc connections between machines that cannot directly connect to each other, facilitating testing, debugging, and collaboration. Using DevTunnels and Restful Web API hosted at your local laptop, you can collect the information who's viewed your portfolio and when. When integrating with third-party services such as webhooks or callback systems, the developers often need a publicly accessible URL to receive notifications or data. Traditionally, this required deploying the application to a remote server or cloud service, which can be time-consuming and inefficient for debugging purposes. This workflow disrupts the local development flow and adds unnecessary complexity. DevTunnels in Visual Studio address this challenge by providing a remote URL that points to a running localhost instance. This feature allows developers to integrate with third-party services without deploying their application, making the development process more efficient and streamlined. First, I would like to show you what we want to achieve. My portfolio is created at GitHub, and every time when client opens it, application determines the client's information and sends it to a RESTful Web API when it runs at my local laptop by using Visual Studio Dev Tunnel. Web API inserts this information in SQL Server database. Open MySQL Server, Database Audit, Table, Remote Access. The table contains these columns. Client ID, it is auto-increment field, primary key. Other columns contains client's information submitted by the site ipinfo.io. It is host name, IP address, city, country, location, latitude and longitude coordinates, or postal code, readme, region, time zone, and I added created date to record the date time when the event happens. The table contains 4 records. First record was inserted when I opened my portfolio at GitHub site using my laptop. Fourth record was inserted when I opened my portfolio at GitHub site using my mobile phone connected to my home Wi-Fi network. Second and third records were inserted when my portfolio at GitHub site was opened by the client from Boydton City, Virginia, US. The hostname is null because the hostname isn't always available for some IPs, and IPinfo team made hostname optional. Let's look how it works. Portfolio website at GitHub communicates with RESTful Web API at my laptop using DevTunnel that I have created. I will explain later in this video how to create DevTunnel. It is pretty straightforward. Before starting our Web API in Visual Studio, we have to select the tunnel that I have created. I have created a couple of dev tunnels with the same name, Web API Audit. One of them is used by my portfolio website at GitHub. Open HTTP drop-down control, dev tunnels, Web API Audit. I think this is the right one. Select it and start application. I remember that DevTunnels URL that I use in portfolio website should start with 28R. Yes, it is right, DevTunnel. Open SQL Server. Check that the table has only 4 records. Open portfolio website on a GitHub. Check SQL Server. We have a new record. Check created date. Yes, it is the current date time. When we don't start Web API from the Visual Studio, portfolio website still will work. The only difference, we will have the one-time error notification in the browser console. Let's stop Web API. Start portfolio. It works. Check console. We have an error. Because communication between portfolio and Web API at my laptop happens only one time, When client opens portfolio website, no any other errors will appear during this session. Let's start. First, we will create Restful Web API project. Open Visual Studio 2022. Start new project. Select project template ASP.NET Core Web API. Name of project Web API Audit. Keep default options. Create. To communicate with database, I will use Entity Framework. To use Entity Framework, we have to install 3 packages. Let's start. Microsoft Entity Framework Core, Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server to communicate with SQL Server, Microsoft Entity Framework Core Tools, it is tool for NuGet Package Manager console in Visual Studio. In particular, we will use commands scaffold dbcontext to produce an entity framework model and dbcontext from an existing database. Also, I will install newsoft.json to serialize the objects via client-server connection. We can see all installed packages under the solution dependencies packages. Create a new database audit in SQL Server. Create table remote access. Here client ID is auto-incremented field that generates a unique number when a new record is inserted into the table. It is primary key in a table. If you decided manually delete the record from this table, do not forget to reset primary key using this command. All other fields correspond to the fields in the client's info submitted by the site, ipinfo.io. And I added created date field to record the date time when the event happens. Table created. Now, using scaffold dbcontext command, we will create model class and dbcontext class automatically. Go to NuGet Package Manager console. Here we will execute this command. Here Alexander is the name of my SQL server. Database name is audit. Trusted connection true specifies Windows connection. And I have to put your attention that we have to include another parameter. Trusted server certificate equal true to avoid an error which is called the certificate chain was issued by an authority that is not trusted. Without this parameter, you will unable to finish this command successfully. So this parameter is important. We indicated the package Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server, an output directory models where the model and dbcontext class will be automatically generated. Press Enter. The command automatically creates entity classes for each table of the database and the context class under the specified folder. We specified folder name as a models. In our case, we have only one table in a database, therefore command created only one model class remote access and dbcontext class audit context. Open audit contexts. Created context class explicitly uses connection string with warning about it. Instead, we can put a connection string under the app settings.json file. After that, we can remove the method on configuring, unnecessary using statements, and register audit context class. Open program.cs file and add these lines. Get connection string from app settings.json file. and register dbContext class audit context. Add a course middleware to our web application pipeline to allow cross-domain requests. After registration our dbContext class audit context with .NET Core dependency injection container, it will give use of instance of dbContext where we will need it. Now we will also use scaffolding to automatically create controller that supports CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete. To create a controller, right-click on Controllers folder and select Add New Scaffolded Item. Select Common API controller with actions using Entity Framework. Select our model class Remote Access and dbContext class Audit Context. Press Add button. It creates Remote Access Controller class with asynchronous HTTP GET, PUT, POST, and DELETE methods. We can remove default controller with forecastcontroller.cs and its class. Start application to check that it works. Yes, it works. Add two simple methods. Check connection to check connection with the server. And override post remote access method to insert client's info into the SQL Server database table remote access. Now to make our ASP.NET Core web project on local host accessible to the public internet, we have to create Visual Studio Dev Tunnel. Click on down arrow next to HTTP button. Select Dev Tunnels, create a tunnel. Next, set a tunnel name. The tunnel type can be set to temporary or persistent. A temporary tunnel will use a new URL when Visual Studio is restarted. A persistent URL will reuse the same URL. Since I don't want to change the URL whenever Visual Studio is restarted, I choose persistent for the tunnel type. The access type can be set to private, organizational, or public. I set the access type to public because it needs to be accessed by external system. Click OK. Run the project. When we create Dev Tunnel first time, it will automatically start when we run the project. The browser window will appear. Click Continue. We see the Dev Tunnels URL. We will use this URL on Portfolio application to communicate with our server-side web API. We can create as many Dev Tunnels as we want, even with the same name. If you want to delete some or all Dev Tunnels, open View Other Windows Dev Tunnels. Here we can remove any of created Dev Tunnels or make the tunnel active by right mouse click, Make Active Tunnel. Client-side. In Visual Studio Code, open client-side application that we created in my previous video. Build portfolio website using Angular 19 and Tailwind CSS. First check Angular version. Angular version is 19. To get client's info, who viewed portfolio, we will use HTTP request to the website ipinfo.io. Import HTTP client from Angular Common HTTP library. In app config, add provide HTTP client. Inject HTTP client service into the constructor of app component. Define private member base URL containing the URL of our dev tunnel. Create remote client class under the type folder. This class contains client's information that we will send and receive from the web API on the server side. To get client's info, implement request to ipinfo.io website under the ng-on-it method because we want to send a request only once when client opens portfolio website. And implement two private methods, send client data and check connection. Method send client data sends client information to the server-side web API using dev tunnel URL as a base URL. On the server-side web API in turn inserts client information into the SQL Server database. Method checks a connection to the server using check connection method and sends client information only when the connection is established. In response, server sends client information that was inserted into SQL Server database. Test application starts server-side application. Check SQL Server database table remote access. It doesn't have any records. Start client-side application. Check SQL Server. No records inserted. It happened because we inserted extra / in the base URL. Remove it and repeat the test. Check SQL Server. The record is inserted. We can refresh portfolio website and additional record will be inserted as well. Second record is inserted. Deploy portfolio application to a GitHub in accordance with the video, host portfolio website on GitHub. I don't want to create the log messages at the client side, therefore I commented them before deployment. Test application after deployment. Select Write Dev Tunnel and start server-side application. Check SQL Server. SQL Server contains two records. Open portfolio website at GitHub. Check SQL Server. A new record is inserted. The application works. I created this video to demonstrate how we can temporarily expose our local web API to the public internet using DevTunnel's feature to get a feedback from our portfolio website. That's all what I wanted to show you in this video. If you are enjoying this content and would like to see more and support my channel, please feel free to like this video and hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching, have a good day, and bye!